The fluorescent lights of Terminal C at Los Angeles International Airport buzzed overhead as 22-year-old Maya Chen clutched her worn leather messenger bag closer to her chest. Her oversized sweater hung loosely on her petite frame, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, glasses perched on her nose as she nervously checked her boarding pass for the 100th time. Flight 447 to New York was delayed by 30 minutes, and Maya found herself standing in the crowded terminal, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. She had always been this way, quiet, unassuming, preferring to blend into the background rather than draw attention to herself. Growing up, she'd learned that staying invisible was often the safest option. Her modest clothing and shy demeanor made her appear like just another college student heading home, perhaps visiting family or returning to school. Nothing about her suggested anything extraordinary, and that was exactly how Maya preferred it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya shifted uncomfortably as she noticed the commotion near Gate 15. A group of young people, clearly from wealthy families judging by their designer clothes and expensive luggage, had gathered around someone who seemed to be holding court. Their laughter was loud and sharp, cutting through the ambient noise of the airport like broken glass. She tried to look away, but something about their energy made her skin crawl. At the center of the group stood a young man who couldn't have been older than 25. His name was Blake Morrison, though Maya didn't know that yet. What she could see was his perfectly styled blonde hair, his designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the gold watch that caught the light every time he gestured dramatically. Blake came from old money, the kind of wealth that had been in his family for generations, the kind that made him believe the world existed solely for his convenience. God, look at this place, full of peasants pretending they belong in first class. Some people really need to learn their place in the world. His words were clearly meant to be overheard, designed to make people feel small and uncomfortable. Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, even though she wasn't even sure he was talking about her specifically. Maya tried to move further away from the group, but the terminal was crowded and her options were limited. She found a spot near a pillar and pulled out a book, hoping that reading would make her less noticeable. The book was worn and clearly well-loved, its pages yellow with age. To Blake and his friends, it probably looked like something from a thrift store, another sign of her lower social status. What they couldn't see was the inscription on the inside cover, written in elegant script. To my darling granddaughter, may you always remember where you come from, no matter how far you go. All my love, Grandmama. The book was a first edition, worth more than Blake's watch, but its true value to Maya was immeasurable. It had been her grandmother's favorite, and Maya carried it everywhere as a reminder of the woman who had raised her to be humble, kind, and strong. Blake's voice grew louder as his performance continued. I swear, they let anyone fly these days. Look around. Half these people probably saved up for months just to afford a coach ticket. Meanwhile, some of us actually belong in the sky. His friends nodded along, though I noticed that even they seemed uncomfortable with how cruel he was being. Maya tried to focus on her book, but the words swam before her eyes. She had dealt with people like Blake before, but it never got easier. There was something particularly painful about being dismissed and diminished by someone who knew nothing about you, who looked at your appearance and made assumptions about your worth as a human being. She glanced at her boarding pass again. The delay meant she would be stuck in this terminal for at least another hour, possibly more. Maya took a deep breath and tried to center herself, remembering her grandmother's words about grace under pressure. She had weathered worse storms than Blake Morrison, and she would weather this one, too. 20 minutes passed, and Blake's performance was reaching new heights of obnoxiousness. He had moved on from general commentary about the quality of passengers to more specific targets. Maya watched with growing horror as he pointed out a young mother struggling with two small children and a broken stroller. "Someone should tell her that designer knockoffs don't actually make you look rich," Blake said loudly enough for the woman to hear. The mother's face flushed red, and she hurriedly tried to fix her stroller while her children began to cry. None of Blake's friends stepped in to help, and none of the other passengers seemed willing to confront the obviously wealthy young man. Maya felt something stirring inside her chest, a familiar warmth that she had learned to suppress over the years. Her grandmother had always told her that with great privilege comes great responsibility. But Maya had spent so long hiding who she really was that standing up for others had become increasingly difficult. Still, watching this woman suffer for Blake's entertainment was becoming unbearable. She was about to close her book and walk over to help the mother when the situation escalated dramatically. Blake, apparently bored with distant observations, decided to get more directly involved in the lives of the people around him. He stood up from his seat and began walking through the gate area, his entourage following like eager puppies. "Excuse me," Blake said to an elderly man reading a newspaper. "Are you sure you're at the right gate? The senior center shuttle usually parks outside." The old man looked up, confused and hurt, but Blake had already moved on to his next target. Maya's hands tightened around her book as she watched Blake approach a young couple who were clearly nervous about flying. "First time in the air?" he asked with false sympathy. "Don't worry, the chances of crashing are only about 1 in 11 million. Of course, that's assuming the pilot isn't having a bad day." The couple exchanged worried looks, and Maya could see the woman's hands beginning to shake. This was too much. Maya stood up slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been raised to believe that silence in the face of cruelty was complicity, that those who had the power to speak up had an obligation to do so. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Kindness isn't just about being nice, darling. Sometimes it's about being brave." But before Maya could take a step, Blake's attention turned to someone new. A teenage girl, probably no more than 16, was sitting alone near the window. She was clearly nervous, fidgeting with her phone and looking around anxiously. Her clothes were simple but clean, and she had a small scholarship pin on her backpack that suggested she was probably traveling to visit a college. Blake zeroed in on her like a predator spotting wounded prey. "Well, well," he said, approaching the girl with his most condescending smile. "Let me guess, scholarship kid heading to tour some fancy school your parents could never afford?" The girl looked up, startled and clearly intimidated. I'm just visiting my sister," she stammered. "Sure you are," Blake replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I bet your sister's doing real well for herself, right? Probably married some rich guy who felt sorry for her, right? That's usually how it works with people like you." Maya's book fell from her hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. The sound seemed to break something inside her, and she found herself moving forward before she had consciously decided to do so. Her grandmother's voice was louder now, drowning out the fear that usually kept her silent. "That's enough," Maya said, her voice quiet but clear as she approached Blake and the frightened teenager. Blake turned around, surprise flickering across his features, before being replaced by amusement. "Excuse me? Did someone ask for your opinion?" He looked Maya up and down dismissively, taking in her modest clothes and shy demeanor. "Let me guess, another scholarship kid who thinks she can play with the big kids." Maya's cheeks were burning, but she held her ground. "I think you should leave her alone. She hasn't done anything to you." Blake's friends had gathered around now, clearly sensing entertainment. Blake himself seemed delighted to have found a new target, even more vulnerable than the teenager he had been tormenting. "Oh, this is rich," Blake said, his voice getting louder. "The little mouse thinks she can stand up to me. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my family is? He stepped closer to Maya, using his height to try to intimidate her. My father owns half the hotels in this city. My mother sits on the board of 3 different charities. We're the kind of people who matter, who actually contribute to society. Maya's voice remained steady, though her hands were shaking slightly. I don't care who your family is. That doesn't give you the right to hurt people. The gathering crowd was making Blake more aggressive, his need to maintain his image in front of his friends overriding any sense of decency he might have possessed. Hurt people? I'm just pointing out the obvious. Some people belong in first class, and some people belong in the back with the rest of the cargo. He looked around at his audience, clearly expecting laughter, but the crowd had grown beyond just his friends. Regular passengers were watching now, and their expressions were far from amused. Blake seemed to realize this and decided to double down rather than back down. You know what your problem is? He said, turning back to Maya. You don't know your place. People like you need to learn that there's a natural order to things, and pretending to be something you're not just makes you look pathetic. Maya felt something shift inside her. A door that had been carefully locked for years suddenly swinging open. Blake's words echoed in her mind. People like you need to learn your place. If only he knew what her place actually was. But she wasn't ready to reveal that yet. Instead, she focused on the scared teenager behind Blake, who was now crying silently. You're right, Maya said quietly, causing Blake to smirk triumphantly. There is a natural order to things, and people who use their privilege to hurt others who can't fight back are at the very bottom of it. Blake's smirk faltered slightly, but his anger was building. Listen, little girl, I've been patient with you, but you're starting to try my nerves. Why don't you run along back to whatever discount airline you're supposed to be flying and leave the real airports to people who actually belong here? The crowd around them had grown larger, with people pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming a confrontation. Maya could see airport security starting to take notice from across the terminal, but they were still dealing with another situation near the baggage claim. I'm not going anywhere, Maya said, her voice growing stronger. And neither is she. She gestured to the teenager. We both have just as much right to be here as you do. Blake's face was starting to turn red, his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Right to be here? You think buying a cheap ticket gives you rights? My family has been flying first class since before you were born. We practically own this airport. One of Blake's friends tugged at his sleeve, clearly uncomfortable with how public the confrontation had become. Blake, maybe we should just... Shut up, Blake snapped, shaking off his friend's hand. I'm teaching these people a lesson they clearly need to learn. He turned back to Maya, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Last chance. Walk away and we'll pretend this never happened. Keep pushing, and you'll find out what happens when you mess with people who actually matter. Maya looked into Blake's eyes and saw everything she had spent her life trying to avoid. Entitlement, cruelty, the absolute certainty that wealth made him superior to everyone around him. She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her that true strength came not from what you owned, but from what you were willing to stand for. No, Maya said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Blake's face went through several emotions: surprise, anger, and finally, rage. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. Let's do this the hard way. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Blake reached out to grab Maya's arm, clearly intending to physically remove her from the situation. Maya stepped back instinctively, but her messenger bag caught on the armrest of a nearby chair. Blake, either not seeing the obstruction or not caring, yanked harder. Maya stumbled, her bag strap breaking and sending her belongings scattering across the floor. Her grandmother's book skittered under a row of seats, its precious pages potentially damaged. Her phone cracked against the tile floor. But it was what fell out of her bag's inner pocket that made several people in the crowd gasp audibly. A small leather wallet had opened as it hit the ground, revealing not just credit cards and identification, but something else entirely. Something that made Blake's eyes widen and his face go pale. "Oh my God," someone in the crowd whispered. "Is that—" Maya quickly knelt to gather her belongings, but it was too late. Several people had already seen what Blake was now staring at in shock. The leather wallet contained more than just Maya's driver's license. It held a diplomatic passport, a UN identification card, and most shocking of all, a small gold badge that read Special Envoy to the Secretary General. Blake's mouth fell open as the implications hit him. This wasn't just some college student or scholarship kid. This wasn't someone he could push around without consequences. The shy, modest girl he had been tormenting was someone with connections that reached the highest levels of international government. You're... Blake stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. Maya looked up from where she was kneeling, her cheeks burning with embarrassment, but her eyes now blazing with something Blake had never seen before. The quiet authority of someone who had grown up in rooms where world-changing decisions were made. "My name is Maya Chen," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent terminal. "My grandmother is Ambassador Chen Li-ming. My mother is Deputy Secretary General Chen Wei-lin. And you just assaulted a diplomatic envoy in front of about 50 witnesses." The color drained completely from Blake's face, as airport security, having finally noticed the commotion, began making their way through the crowd. His friends had already started backing away, suddenly very interested in examining their phones and pretending they had never seen him before in their lives. But Maya wasn't done yet. As she stood up, carefully placing her diplomatic credentials back in her wallet, she looked directly into Blake's eyes with the kind of quiet power that comes from a lifetime of watching how the world really works. "You wanted to teach me about knowing my place. Well, congratulations. Now you're about to learn about yours." The first security officer to reach the scene was Officer Martinez, a 20-year veteran of airport security who had seen everything from drunk celebrities to international incidents. As he approached the crowd, he immediately noticed the tension in the air and the way people were holding up their phones, recording whatever was happening at the center of the commotion. "What's going on here?" Officer Martinez asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to dealing with difficult situations. The crowd began to part, revealing Maya, who was still gathering her scattered belongings, and Blake, who looked like he had just seen a ghost. "Officer," Blake said quickly, his voice higher than usual as he tried to regain his composure. "There's been a misunderstanding. This girl was causing trouble, getting in people's faces, and I was just trying to—" "That's not what happened," interrupted the teenage girl Blake had originally been harassing. Her voice was shaky, but she was determined to speak up. "He was being mean to everyone, calling people names, and when she tried to help me, he grabbed her and knocked her stuff everywhere." Several voices from the crowd began confirming the girl's account. "The young man was being very disruptive," said an older woman with a British accent, "quite rude to several passengers." Another voice chimed in, "He was bullying people, officer. The girl was just trying to help." Officer Martinez looked between Blake and Maya, taking in the scene. Maya was still kneeling on the ground, carefully checking her grandmother's book for damage, while Blake stood over her, his expensive suit somehow making him look smaller rather than more important in this context. "Miss, are you hurt?" Officer Martinez asked Maya, extending a hand to help her up. "I'm fine, thank you," Maya replied, accepting his help and standing gracefully. She had managed to collect most of her belongings, though her phone screen was clearly cracked. It was just a misunderstanding. Blake seized on this, relief flooding his features. "See, she said it herself. Just a misunderstanding. No harm done. We could all just move on with our lives." But Officer Martinez had 20 years of experience reading people, and something about this situation didn't add up. The crowd's reaction, the way Blake was sweating despite the air conditioning, and most importantly, the small gold badge he had glimpsed before Maya tucked it back into her wallet. All of these things suggested this was far from a simple misunderstanding. "Miss, could I see some identification, please?" Officer Martinez asked Maya politely. "Of course." Maya replied, reaching into her wallet. She hesitated for just a moment, glancing at Blake, who was watching her with growing panic in his eyes. Then she handed over not just her driver's license, but her diplomatic passport as well. Officer Martinez's eyebrows rose as he examined the documents. His radio crackled to life, and he spoke into it quietly. "This is Martinez at Gate 15. I need Supervisor Johnson down here immediately. We have a situation involving diplomatic personnel." Blake's face went from pale to green. Diplomatic personnel? What are you talking about? She's just some college kid trying to— "Sir," Officer Martinez interrupted, his tone becoming much more serious. "I'm going to need you to calm down and wait for my supervisor to arrive, and I'm going to need to see your identification as well." Blake fumbled for his wallet, his hand shaking slightly as he handed over his driver's license. The confidence that had radiated from him just minutes earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. "Blake Morrison," Officer Martinez read aloud. "And what exactly happened here, Mr. Morrison?" Well, she was— Blake struggled to find words that would somehow minimize what he had done. "Look, I didn't know who she was. I mean, she doesn't look like— I thought she was just—" He gestured helplessly at Maya's modest appearance. "You thought I was just what?" Maya asked quietly, and there was something in her tone that made Blake realize he was digging himself deeper with every word. "I didn't mean— I wasn't trying to—" He looked around desperately, hoping to find support from his friends, but they had all mysteriously disappeared, suddenly very interested in their own travel arrangements and completely unaware of his existence. Supervisor Johnson arrived, a stern-looking woman in her 50s who took one look at the diplomatic passport and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. She pulled Officer Martinez aside for a quick consultation, and Maya could see them glancing back at her with the kind of respect usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "Miss Chen," Supervisor Johnson said, approaching Maya with professional courtesy, "I apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced. Could you please tell me exactly what happened here?" Maya looked at Blake, who was now visibly sweating and seemed to be having trouble standing still. Part of her, the part that had been raised to be diplomatic, to smooth over conflicts and find peaceful solutions, wanted to minimize the incident. But another part of her, the part that remembered every person Blake had humiliated in the past hour, knew that some lessons could only be learned the hard way. "Mr. Morrison was harassing several passengers," Maya said clearly. "When I asked him to stop bothering a young girl, he became aggressive. He threatened me, grabbed my arm, and when I tried to move away, he yanked me hard enough to break my bag and send my belongings flying." She gestured to her cracked phone and the scattered items she had been collecting. "That's not— I mean, yes, there was contact, but it wasn't—" Blake was struggling to find a version of events that wouldn't result in serious consequences. "I didn't know she was— I mean, she's dressed like—" "Like what, Mr. Morrison?" asked Supervisor Johnson, her voice dangerously quiet. "Miss Chen, given your status, we need to treat this as a potential assault on diplomatic personnel. That's a federal offense. Would you like to press charges?" Maya looked at Blake, really looked at him, for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Gone was the arrogant young man who had strutted through the terminal like he owned it. In his place stood someone who was beginning to understand that money and family connections couldn't fix every problem. Maya started, then paused. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that with great privilege came great responsibility. But which responsibility was more important? Showing mercy to someone who had shown none to others, or ensuring that Blake learned a lesson that might prevent him from hurting people in the future? "Before I decide," Maya said slowly, "I'd like to hear from the other people Mr. Morrison interacted with today." Supervisor Johnson nodded and turned to the crowd, which had remained despite the arrival of security. Did anyone else have an interaction with Mr. Morrison before this incident? The teenage girl Maya had originally defended stepped forward, her voice still shaky but growing stronger. He said terrible things about my family. He assumed I was poor and made fun of me for it. He said my sister probably married someone rich because she felt sorry for her. The young mother with the broken stroller spoke up next. He made loud comments about my clothes, calling them knockoffs, making my children upset. One by one, Blake's victims began to tell their stories. The elderly man he had mocked for his age. The nervous couple he had frightened with talk of plane crashes. A businessman he had dismissed as middle management trying to play in the big leagues. Each account painted a picture of systematic cruelty, of someone who took pleasure in making others feel small and worthless. Blake's face grew more ashen with each testimony. I didn't mean... It was just jokes, he stammered weakly. Jokes? The elderly man stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of his years. Young man, I'm a retired teacher. I spent 40 years working with children, many of them from wealthy families like yours. And I can tell you that what you did today wasn't joking. It was bullying, plain and simple. Blake looked around desperately, searching for anyone who might support his version of events, but he found only faces filled with disappointment and disgust. Even the airport staff who were watching seemed to view him with contempt. Miss Chen, we can proceed in several ways. Given your diplomatic status, this could be handled at the federal level. Alternatively, Mr. Morrison could face charges for disturbing the peace, harassment, and simple assault under state law. Or, she paused, looking between Maya and Blake. Or, if you prefer, this could be handled administratively through the airport authority. Maya felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had the power to seriously impact Blake's life, and she knew that how she used that power would say something important about who she was as a person. Mr. Morrison, Maya said, turning to face Blake directly, do you understand what you did wrong today? Blake nodded eagerly, sensing a possible path to redemption. Yes, absolutely. I was rude, I was inappropriate, I shouldn't have touched you. I'm sorry, really sorry. Are you sorry you did it, or are you sorry you got caught? Maya asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Blake opened his mouth to respond quickly, then stopped, realizing that his answer mattered more than he had initially understood. Blake struggled with the question. I guess I never really thought about how it felt from the other side. I was showing off for my friends, trying to be funny, and I didn't think about how it was affecting real people. Maya nodded slowly. And what do you think should happen now? Blake looked around at the faces watching him, the people he had hurt, the security officers, the crowd of strangers who had witnessed his behavior. For perhaps the first time in his life, he was being forced to truly consider the consequences of his actions.
I should apologize, Blake said quietly. To everyone. Really apologize, not just because I got in trouble. He turned to the teenage girl first. I'm sorry for what I said about your family. That was cruel and wrong, and you didn't deserve it. One by one, Blake made his way through the group, offering genuine apologies to each person he had hurt. His voice grew stronger as he continued, as if the act of acknowledging his wrongs was helping him understand them better. When he finished, he turned back to Maya. I don't know what else to say, except that I'm sorry. And I understand if that's not enough. I understand if you need to press charges. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity versus manipulation. She had grown up around politicians and diplomats, people who could fake emotion better than most actors. But something in Blake's expression suggested that this experience had genuinely shaken him. Mr. Morrison, Maya said finally, I believe in second chances, but I also believe that actions have consequences. Blake held his breath, waiting for her decision. I'm not going to press federal charges, Maya continued, and Blake's relief was visible. But you're going to do several things. First, you're going to miss your flight today. Instead, you're going to spend the next few hours here at the airport, helping passengers with their luggage, giving directions, and generally making people's travel experience better instead of worse. Blake nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely, whatever you think is right. Second, Maya continued, you're going to make a donation to a scholarship fund for students from low-income families. A significant donation, enough that it actually impacts your lifestyle, not just your pocket change. How much? Blake asked, and Maya could see him calculating numbers in his head. That's for you to decide, Maya said. But remember, several people recorded what happened here today. Your behavior is going to follow you for a while. How you handle what comes next will determine whether you're remembered as someone who learned from his mistakes or someone who just tried to buy his way out of them.
Blake nodded solemnly, the weight of Maya's words clearly sinking in. I understand. I'll do better. I promise. Supervisor Johnson looked between Maya and Blake, then addressed the crowd. All right, everyone, the situation is resolved. Please continue with your travel plans. The crowd began to disperse, though many people continued to glance back at Blake with curiosity and judgment. As the immediate crisis passed, Maya finally had a moment to fully assess the damage to her belongings. Her phone screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, but still functional. Her laptop case had protected her computer from damage. Most importantly, her grandmother's book appeared to be unharmed, just a little scuffed on the cover. Ms. Chen, Supervisor Johnson said, approaching her with a business card, I want you to know that this incident will be fully documented in our system. If Mr. Morrison causes any further problems, or if you change your mind about pressing charges, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. Thank you, Maya replied, accepting the card. I appreciate how professionally you handled this. Officer Martinez stepped forward as well. Miss, I have to say, what you did just now, that took real character. A lot of people in your position would have thrown the book at him. Maya smiled slightly. My grandmother always taught me that mercy is only meaningful when you have the power to be merciless. But she also taught me that mercy without accountability is just enabling bad behavior. As the security officers moved away to handle other duties, Maya found herself alone with Blake for the first time since the confrontation began. The young man who had seemed so large and intimidating just an hour ago now appeared smaller, diminished by the weight of his actions and their consequences. Thank you, Blake said quietly. I know I don't deserve your mercy, but thank you. Maya looked at him carefully, still trying to gauge his sincerity. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Morrison. Proving that you've learned something is going to take a lot more than a few apologies. The real test is what you do when no one is watching. Blake nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. Can I ask you something? Why were you traveling alone? I mean, if your family is so important, don't you usually have security or assistance or something? Maya's expression softened slightly. That's exactly why I travel alone sometimes. When you grow up in diplomatic circles, everything is formal, scheduled, observed. Sometimes I just want to be a normal person for a few hours. She gestured to her modest clothes. This is who I am when I'm not being Ambassador Chen's granddaughter or Deputy Secretary General Chen's daughter. This is just Maya, but you could have told me who you were from the beginning. I would have stopped immediately. That's exactly the problem. You should have stopped because it was the right thing to do, not because I have important family members. The way you treat people shouldn't depend on their connections or their bank account. Blake was quiet for a long moment, processing this. I never thought about it that way, he admitted finally. Most people in your position don't. That's not entirely your fault. You've been raised in a bubble where your family name opens doors and solves problems. But that same privilege makes it easy to forget that other people are dealing with real struggles, real challenges that can't be fixed with money or connections. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the airport's PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 447 to New York will begin boarding in 15 minutes. Please have your boarding passes and identification ready.
Maya looked at her cracked phone to check the time, then began gathering her belongings. That's my flight. Blake watched her prepare to leave, and something in his expression suggested he wasn't ready for this conversation to end. Maya, can I ask you something else? She paused, looking at him with raised eyebrows. What would you have done if I hadn't grabbed you? If I had just kept being rude, but didn't get physical? Maya considered the question carefully. I probably would have helped that girl find a seat away from you, maybe talk to a flight attendant about the disruption you were causing. I wouldn't have revealed who I was, but I wouldn't have let you continue hurting people either. So, you would have stood up to me either way? Of course, Maya said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Being scared of confrontation doesn't mean you get to ignore injustice. It just means you have to be braver than you feel. Blake nodded slowly, and Maya could see him genuinely absorbing her words. I have a lot to think about, he said. Yes, you do, Maya agreed, but thinking isn't enough. What matters is what you do with those thoughts. As Maya walked toward her gate, Blake called out after her. Maya, do you think I'll see you again? Maya turned back, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Mr. Morrison, if you really do learn from this experience, if you really do become a better person, then our paths probably will cross again someday. The world of people who actually try to make a difference is smaller than you might think. Blake watched her go, and for the first time in his life, he found himself genuinely hoping that he would be worthy of joining that world.
Maya made her way to the boarding gate, her mind still processing everything that had just happened. As she walked, she noticed several passengers from the earlier incident nodding to her respectfully, and a few even approached to thank her for standing up to Blake. The teenage girl Blake had originally targeted caught up with her near the gate. Excuse me, the girl said shyly. I just wanted to thank you for what you did back there. I'm Sarah, by the way. Maya, she replied with a warm smile. And you don't need to thank me, Sarah. You were brave enough to speak up to the security officer. That took courage. Sarah's eyes were still slightly red from crying, but she managed a genuine smile. I was so scared. I've never had anyone talk to me like that before. Where I come from, people are usually pretty nice to each other. Where are you from? Maya asked, genuinely interested. Small town in Iowa. I'm actually flying to New York to visit Columbia University. I got a full scholarship, and they invited me for a special preview weekend. Her voice carried a mixture of pride and nervousness. Maya's expression brightened considerably. Columbia? That's wonderful! My mother actually gave a lecture there last year on international relations. It's an incredible school. Sarah's eyes widened. Your mother teaches there? Not exactly, Maya said with a gentle laugh. She works for the United Nations, but she does guest lectures at various universities. Maya didn't elaborate further, wanting to keep the focus on Sarah's achievement rather than her own family's accomplishments. Wow, she breathed. That's amazing. And here I was, worried that maybe I don't belong at a fancy school like Columbia. Maya stopped walking and turned to face Sarah directly. Listen to me very carefully. You earned that scholarship. You belong at Columbia just as much as anyone else who'll be attending. Don't let people like Blake Morrison make you question your worth. Meanwhile, back at the scene of the incident, Blake was standing awkwardly near Gate 15, trying to figure out how to follow through on Maya's instructions. Supervisor Johnson had assigned Officer Martinez to keep an eye on him, making sure he actually spent his time helping other passengers, rather than just waiting for enough time to pass that he could claim he'd fulfilled his obligation. The first few minutes were excruciating. Blake approached an elderly couple struggling with their heavy suitcases, but they recognized him from the earlier commotion and politely declined his help with suspicious looks. A family with young children actually moved away when they saw him coming, the mother pulling her kids closer protectively. "This is harder than I thought it would be," Blake muttered to Officer Martinez, who was watching from a nearby pillar. "Good," Martinez replied bluntly. "Maybe that means you're starting to understand how your actions affect people." Blake tried again, this time approaching a business traveler who was looking confused at the departure board. "Excuse me, do you need help finding your gate?" The man looked at Blake suspiciously. "Why?" The question caught Blake off guard. In his world, offers of help usually came with ulterior motives, networking opportunities, social climbing, or the expectation of favors in return. The idea that someone might be genuinely suspicious of a simple offer to help had never occurred to him. I saw you looking confused, and I thought maybe I could help," Blake said lamely. The businessman studied Blake's face for a moment, then gestured to the departure board. "I'm looking for C7, but these signs are terrible." "C7 is down that way, about a 10-minute walk. If you're running late, there's a moving walkway about halfway down Trestle that'll speed things up."
"Thanks," the man said, still looking slightly puzzled but grateful for the information. As the businessman walked away, Blake felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, the simple satisfaction of helping someone without expecting anything in return. It was such a foreign feeling that he almost didn't recognize it at first. Over the next hour, Blake gradually found his rhythm. He helped an overwhelmed mother carry her toddler's stroller down a flight of stairs. He gave directions to at least a dozen confused travelers. He even spent 20 minutes sitting with an elderly man who was nervous about flying, talking him through what to expect and sharing stories about his own travel experiences to help calm the man's nerves. With each interaction, Blake began to see the airport and the people in it differently. Instead of a playground for his entertainment or a stage for his superiority, he started to see it as a place where real people were dealing with real challenges. The stressed business traveler rushing to make a connection that could save or cost him an important deal, the elderly woman flying alone to see her grandchildren for the first time in 2 years, the young soldier heading home on leave carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a picture of his family. Meanwhile, on Flight 447, Maya had settled into her seat, not in first class despite her family's ability to afford it, but in economy with the regular passengers. She had specifically requested the economy seat because she wanted the full experience of traveling as a normal person. The teenage girl, Sarah, had ended up seated just a few rows behind her, and Maya could hear her excitedly talking to the passenger next to her about her upcoming college visit. The conversation made Maya smile, remembering her own first visit to a university, the mixture of excitement and terror that came with stepping into a new world. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya found herself thinking about Blake Morrison. She had dealt with entitled people before. It was unfortunately common in diplomatic circles, but there had been something different about this encounter. Maybe it was because Blake was closer to her own age, or maybe it was because his cruelty had been so public and direct, but something about the interaction had affected her more deeply than usual.
She pulled out her cracked phone and composed a text message to her mother. Delayed at LAX. Minor incident, but handled well. Will call when I land. Maya hesitated before sending the message. Her mother would undoubtedly ask for details, and Maya would have to explain about Blake, about revealing her identity, about choosing mercy over punishment. She knew her mother would be proud of how she'd handled the situation, but there would also be questions about whether she'd been too lenient, whether she'd missed an opportunity to send a stronger message about respecting diplomatic personnel. But as Maya looked around the plane at her fellow passengers, people from all walks of life heading to New York for dozens of different reasons, she felt confident in her decision. Real change didn't come from punishment alone. It came from understanding, from empathy, from the gradual recognition that other people's experiences mattered as much as your own.
Back at LAX, Blake was discovering that helping people was more challenging and more rewarding than he had ever imagined. His latest interaction was with a family whose flight had been canceled, leaving them stranded overnight with 3 young children and nowhere to go. The airline is offering hotel vouchers, Blake explained to the frustrated father, but there's a special family lounge on the 2nd level that's open 24 hours. It has comfortable chairs, charging stations, and they serve free snacks. It might be better for the kids than trying to navigate hotel shuttles this late. The mother looked at Blake suspiciously. How do you know about this lounge? Are you trying to get rid of us? The question stung because Blake realized it was exactly the kind of thing he might have done just a few hours earlier, found a way to move inconvenient people out of his sight. But now, faced with a family genuinely in need, he found himself wanting to actually help. I know about it because my family travels a lot, Blake said honestly. And I'm telling you about it because your kids look tired and stressed, and it might be more comfortable than sleeping on these hard chairs down here. Officer Martinez, who had been watching Blake's interactions throughout the evening, approached the family. He's right about the family lounge, Martinez confirmed. It's a good option for overnight stays with children. The family's skepticism faded, and they began gathering their belongings to head upstairs. As they walked away, the youngest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 4, looked back at Blake and waved. "Thank you, mister." Blake felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite identify at first. It took him a moment to realize it was shame, not for what he had just done, but for all the times he could have helped people and chose not to. How many families like this one had he walked past without a second thought? How many people had he dismissed as unworthy of his attention simply because they couldn't benefit him in some way? "How are you feeling, Mr. Morrison?" Officer Martinez asked, joining Blake near the departure board. "Honestly, confused. I keep thinking I should be angry about this, about having my travel plans disrupted, about being forced to, perform community service or whatever this is. But I'm not angry. I don't know what I am." Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I've been working airport security for 20 years. I've seen a lot of people get caught doing stupid things, and most of them react one of 2 ways. Either they get angrier and more defensive, or they start to really think about what brought them to that moment. It sounds like you're in the second category." "Is that good or bad?" Blake asked. "That depends entirely on what you do with those thoughts," Martinez replied, echoing Maya's earlier words. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near Gate 18. A young man in military uniform was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the contents of his duffel bag, looking distressed. "What's wrong, son?" Martinez asked gently. "My orders," the soldier said, his voice tight with anxiety. "I can't find my orders anywhere, and without them I can't get on the flight home, and if I miss this flight I'll be AWOL and—" He ran his hands through his hair frantically. Blake knelt down without thinking, helping the soldier sort through his scattered belongings. "What do the orders look like? Are they in an envelope, loose papers, what?" "Official envelope, brown, with my name typed on the front," the soldier replied, continuing to search. Blake methodically went through each section of the duffel bag while Martinez checked with gate agents about the soldier's options if the orders couldn't be found.
After several minutes of searching, Blake noticed something that the soldier had missed in his panic. "Check your uniform pocket," Blake suggested. "Sometimes when you're nervous, you put important things in the safest place you can think of, then forget because it's not where you usually put them." The soldier reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the brown envelope, his face flooding with relief. "Oh my God, thank you. I was so worried about missing the flight that I—" He shook his head, embarrassed by his panic. "It happens to everyone," Blake said, helping him repack his bag. "I once lost my passport 3 times in the same day because I kept putting it in safe places and forgetting where those were." The soldier laughed, his stress finally beginning to fade. "I really appreciate this, man. I haven't been home in 8 months, and my little sister's birthday is tomorrow. If I've missed this flight—" Blake felt that strange emotion again, the one he was slowly recognizing as genuine care for another person's well-being. "You're not going to miss it," he said firmly. "You've got your orders, your ID, and your boarding pass. You're going home." As the soldier headed to his gate, he turned back to Blake. "Hey, what's your name? I'd like to thank you properly when I get home. Maybe send a note or something." Blake hesitated, old habits making him want to give his full name, mention his family's importance, turn this interaction into a networking opportunity. But then he remembered Maya's words about doing the right thing when no one was watching. "Just Blake," he said simply, "and no note necessary. Just hug your little sister for me." As Blake watched the soldier disappear into the crowd heading toward his gate, Officer Martinez approached with a slight smile on his face. "That was well done, Mr. Morrison." "Thanks," Blake replied, and for the first time in his life, he felt like praise he had actually earned. "You know, this is probably going to sound weird, but I think I understand now why Maya didn't press charges." "Oh? How's that?" Blake gestured around the terminal, taking in the hundreds of travelers, each with their own stories, their own destinations, their own challenges. "If she'd had me arrested, I would have spent tonight in a cell feeling sorry for myself and angry at her. I would have learned that there were consequences for messing with important people, but I wouldn't have learned anything about why what I did was wrong." Martinez nodded approvingly. "And what have you learned?" Blake was quiet for a long moment, trying to put his thoughts into words. "I learned that every person here has something going on in their life that I know nothing about. That businessman I helped earlier, he mentioned he was rushing to get home because his father was in the hospital. The family upstairs in the lounge, they're moving across the country because the dad lost his job, and this trip is basically their last big expense before they have to start over." He paused, running his hand through his hair. "I spent so much time today, hell, my whole life, looking at people and making assumptions based on how they looked, how much money they seemed to have, whether they could do something for me. I never bothered to think about them as actual people with actual lives." "That's a pretty big realization," Martinez observed. "Yeah, it is," Blake agreed. "And it's also terrifying because now I'm thinking about all the times I've been cruel to people, all the opportunities I've had to help someone and just didn't. How do you come back from that?" Before Martinez could answer, Blake's phone rang. The caller ID showed his father's name, and Blake felt his stomach drop. Word had apparently reached his family about the incident at the airport. "I have to take this," Blake said apologetically, stepping away from Martinez. "Blake, what the hell happened at LAX?" His father's voice boomed through the phone. "I just got a call from our family lawyer saying you were involved in some kind of incident with diplomatic personnel." Blake closed his eyes, knowing this conversation was going to be even more difficult than he had anticipated. "Dad, I messed up. I really messed up." "What exactly did you mess up, and why am I hearing about it from our lawyer instead of from you?" Blake looked around the terminal, watching the people he had spent the last few hours helping. The elderly man he'd comforted was now boarding his flight with a smile. The confused travelers he'd given directions to were successfully finding their gates. The family with the canceled flight had sent their youngest daughter down to wave at him again, before heading to the lounge. "I was being cruel to people, Dad. I was showing off, being mean to strangers for no reason other than I thought it was funny. And when someone stood up to me, I grabbed her." There was silence on the other end of the line for several seconds. Then, "You grabbed her? Blake, please tell me you didn't assault someone." "I did. I grabbed her arm and knocked her belongings everywhere. And it turns out she's the granddaughter of a UN ambassador and the daughter of a deputy secretary general." More silence, then, "Jesus Christ, Blake. Do you have any idea what this could do to our family, our business relationships, our reputation?" The question hit Blake like a physical blow, but not for the reasons his father intended. "Dad, is that really your first concern? Not that I hurt someone, not that I was cruel to innocent people, but how it affects our reputation?" "Of course that's my concern," his father snapped. "We've built this family's name over generations, and you could destroy it all with one stupid mistake." Blake felt something fundamental shift inside him, like a door closing on one part of his life and opening on another. "Dad, what if I told you that the person I hurt chose not to press charges, that she showed me mercy when she had every right to destroy me? I'd say she made a smart choice, and you'd better make damn sure nothing like this ever happens again." Blake looked over at Officer Martinez, who was giving him space but clearly keeping an eye on the conversation. He thought about Maya's quiet dignity, about her choice to seek justice through understanding rather than punishment. He thought about the soldiers and families and confused travelers he'd helped tonight, and how none of them had cared about his last name or his family's money. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. When was the last time you did something to help someone who couldn't help you back?" "What kind of question is that? We donate to charity. We support the arts. That's not what I'm asking," Blake interrupted. "When was the last time you saw someone struggling and helped them, not because it was a tax write-off or good PR, but just because it was the right thing to do?" His father's voice grew cold. "Blake, you're clearly not thinking straight right now. Come home immediately, and we'll figure out how to handle this situation." "No, Dad," Blake said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "I'm not coming home tonight. I'm going to stay here and keep helping people, because for the first time in my life, I'm doing something that actually matters." Blake ended the call and turned back to Officer Martinez, who had clearly heard at least part of the conversation. "That sounded like it went well," Martinez said dryly. Blake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I just realized that my father and I have very different definitions of what matters in life." "And which definition are you going to choose?" Blake looked around the terminal one more time, taking in the late-night travelers, the airport staff working overnight shifts, the security officers like Martinez who spent their careers keeping people safe. Then he thought about Maya, somewhere over the continental United States by now, carrying herself with quiet dignity and genuine strength. "I'm going to choose the one that lets me sleep at night," Blake said finally. 3 months later, Maya Chen stood in the lobby of the United Nations building in New York, reviewing her notes for an upcoming meeting on international youth development programs. Her cracked phone had been replaced, but she still carried her grandmother's book everywhere, a reminder of the values that guided her work. She was so focused on her preparation that she almost missed the familiar voice speaking to the security guard at the front desk. "I have an appointment to meet with someone from the youth development program," the voice was saying. "My name is Blake Morrison." Maya looked up, startled, and saw a young man who looked remarkably like the person she had encountered at LAX, but somehow fundamentally different. His clothes were still expensive, but they were practical rather than showy. His posture was more relaxed, less performative. Most notably, his eyes held something they hadn't possessed at the airport: genuine humility. Blake finished checking in with security and turned around, scanning the lobby for his meeting contact. When his eyes met Maya's, his face went through a series of emotions: surprise, recognition, embarrassment, and something that might have been hope. "Maya," he said, approaching her carefully. I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Blake," Maya replied, studying his face. "You look different." Blake managed a self-conscious smile. "I hope that's a good thing. I've been working on myself." Maya gestured to a quiet seating area in the lobby. "Do you have a few minutes before your meeting?" They sat down, and Blake seemed nervous for the first time since Maya had known him. "I need to start by apologizing again," he said. "I know I apologized at the airport, but I've had 3 months to really think about what I did, and I understand now that my behavior was worse than I realized at the time." "What have you been doing for the past 3 months?" Maya asked, genuinely curious. Blake took a deep breath. "Well, first I made that donation you suggested. It ended up being a full scholarship endowment at Columbia University, specifically for first-generation college students from rural communities." Maya's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's very generous." "It was the right thing to do," Blake said simply. "But that was just the beginning. I also started volunteering at a community center in downtown LA, helping with their literacy program. And I've been working with a therapist to understand why I thought treating people the way I did was acceptable." Maya leaned back in her chair, impressed despite herself. "That's quite a transformation." "It's ongoing," admitted Blake. "Some days are harder than others. But what you showed me that day at the airport, about how to treat people with dignity regardless of their background, it changed something fundamental in how I see the world." "And what brings you to the UN today?" Maya's expression grew more serious. "I applied for an internship with the Youth Development Program. I know it sounds crazy, coming from someone who 3 months ago was the poster child for entitled rich kid behavior, but I want to do something meaningful with my life. I want to help create opportunities for people like Sarah." "Sarah?" Maya asked, confused. "The girl I was harassing at the airport," Blake explained. "I found her name later and sent her a scholarship to help with her college expenses. We've actually become, well, I wouldn't say friends exactly, but she's been helping me understand what it's like to grow up without privilege." Maya felt a warm feeling spreading through her chest. This was more than she had dared to hope for when she chose mercy over punishment that day at LAX. "I have to ask, what happened with your family? Your father didn't sound very supportive when you called him from the airport." Blake's expression darkened slightly. "That's been the hardest part, honestly. My parents were furious about the airport incident, but not for the reasons I hoped they would be. They were angry about the potential damage to our reputation, not about the harm I had caused to other people." He paused, looking out the window at the East River. "We've had some difficult conversations over the past few months. I've tried to explain how I've changed, but they see my volunteer work and my therapy as, I don't know, a phase I'm going through. They keep expecting me to come to my senses and go back to the way things were." "That must be very difficult," Maya said softly. "It is," Blake agreed, "but I keep thinking about something you said that day, about doing the right thing when no one is watching. My parents are watching, but they're hoping I'll fail. The people at the community center, the kids I work with, Sarah, they're watching too, but they're hoping I'll succeed. I'd rather live up to their hopes than down to my parents' expectations." Maya felt a surge of respect for the young man sitting across from her. The transformation he had undergone was remarkable, but she could see that it had come at a real personal cost. Blake, Maya said, I need to tell you something. I'm actually the person you're supposed to meet with today. Blake's eyes widened. You're... what? I oversee the Youth Development Internship Program. When I saw your application, I have to admit I was skeptical. But your essay about learning to see beyond privilege and the references from the community center where you volunteer, they painted a picture of someone who had genuinely changed.
Blake looked stunned. So you're going to be my supervisor? Maya smiled. If you still want the internship, yes, but I need you to understand something. This program isn't about giving wealthy kids a chance to feel good about themselves. We work with young people from some of the most challenging circumstances imaginable. They don't need another privileged person coming in to save them. They need allies who understand that they're the experts on their own lives. I understand, Blake said earnestly. I've learned a lot about the difference between helping and patronizing over the past few months. Sometimes the most important thing I can do is just listen. Maya nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. And there's one more thing you should know. Sarah, the girl from the airport, she's one of our program participants. She's been working with us on a project to create mentorship opportunities for rural students transitioning to urban universities. Blake's face lit up. Really? That's incredible. I knew she was smart, but I had no idea she was involved in something like this. She specifically requested to be part of your evaluation process, Maya continued. She said she wanted to see if the person who applied for this internship was the same person who helped her at the airport, or the same person who hurt her. And what did she conclude? Blake asked nervously. She said, and I quote, "He's neither of those people. He's someone new, someone who learned from his mistakes and chose to grow instead of making excuses." Blake was quiet for a long moment, clearly emotional. I don't know what to say. I never thought, I hoped I could somehow make up for what I did, but I never imagined I could earn forgiveness from the people I hurt. Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something people choose to give. But redemption, that's something you have to work for every day. Blake nodded solemnly. I understand, and I want to work for it. I want to spend my life making sure that what happened at the airport never happens again, not just with me, but with anyone I have the power to influence. Maya stood up, extending her hand to Blake. Then welcome to the Youth Development Program, Blake. Your real education starts now. As Blake shook her hand, Maya could see tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly, for giving me a second chance, for showing me there was a better way to live, for everything. Don't thank me yet, Maya said with a smile that held both warmth and challenge. Thank me in a year, when you've proven to yourself and everyone else that people really can change. 6 months later, Blake Morrison stood in front of a group of high school students from low-income families, leading a workshop on college preparation. Sarah sat in the front row, now a successful freshman at Columbia and a peer mentor in the program. The most important thing I want you to understand, Blake was telling the students, is that your worth as a person has nothing to do with your bank account, your family's connections, or any external measure of success. It has to do with how you treat other people, especially those who can't do anything for you in return. After the workshop, as the students filed out, chattering excitedly about college applications and scholarship opportunities, Sarah approached Blake. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we met that day at the airport. Blake was surprised. Really? Even though I was awful to you? Sarah smiled. Especially because you were awful to me. If you'd been nice from the beginning, you might never have learned to be truly kind. And these kids, she gestured to the departing students, they needed to meet someone who understood what it was like to be wrong and to choose to be better. Blake felt that familiar warmth in his chest, the feeling he now recognized as genuine purpose. Thank you, Sarah, for giving me the chance to become someone worth knowing. As Blake packed up his materials and prepared to leave, he thought about Maya's words from that first day at the UN. People really can change. He had proven it to himself, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one person at a time. The shy girl from the airport had shown him mercy when he deserved justice, and in doing so, she had given him the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to become someone he could actually respect. Blake Morrison was no longer the entitled rich boy who thought his wealth made him superior to others. He was something far more valuable. He was a person who understood that true worth came from lifting others up, not putting them down. And in the end, that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.